My name is Pansy. I'm 27 years old. I remember the exact moment the fight just left my body. It wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no slamming doors. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in spring. I was 24, and I just found out I landed a major promotion at work, a position I had poured my heart and soul into for over a year. My hands were shaking as I called my mom, my voice buzzing with an electricity I hadn't felt in a long, long time. It was the kind of news you can't wait to share, the kind of validation that feels like sunshine after a brutal winter. I got her voicemail. An hour later, she called back. "Oh, honey, that's nice," she said, her voice totally distracted. Before I could even get a word in, she pivoted. "Listen, I can't talk long. Your brother just sent me a photo of the lasagna he made for dinner. You should see it. The cheese pull is incredible. He's becoming such a little chef." And that was it. A promotion I had bled for was reduced to a passing, "That's nice," completely eclipsed by a midweek lasagna. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It clicked. The desperate, hopeful part of me that had spent 2 decades trying to win, trying to be enough, just quietly packed its bags and walked out the door. The competition was over because I was no longer competing. Growing up, my family's emotional landscape had 2 distinct climates. There was the warm, sunny tropics where my older brother lived, and then there were the temperate, often overlooked plains where I resided. He was the golden child, though we never used those words. He didn't have to be brilliant or exceptionally talented. His existence was simply the main event. My achievements were met with polite nods. His got standing ovations. This dynamic isn't just a quirky family trait. It's a recognized pattern in dysfunctional family systems. The golden child often reflects the parent's own unfulfilled dreams, becoming an extension of their ego. The other child, whether they become the rebellious scapegoat or the compliant, invisible child, serves a different purpose: to absorb the family's issues, or simply to not cause any trouble. I was the latter, the low-maintenance one, the easy one. A title that sounds like a compliment but feels like a life sentence. I learned early on that my needs were secondary. I must have been about 10, and I came home from school bursting with pride. I'd been cast as the lead in the school play. It felt momentous, like my world had just cracked open with possibility. I ran into the kitchen, my script clutched in my hand like a holy text. My mom was on the phone, and I waited, vibrating with excitement. When she hung up, I blurted it out. "I got the lead, Mom. I'm going to be Annie." She smiled, a brief, fleeting smile. "That's wonderful, sweetie. Just be quiet for a minute. I need to call the doctor. Your brother has a bit of a cough, and I'm worried it could turn into something." His cough, which was just a minor cold, became the focus of the entire evening. My script lay on the counter, forgotten. The feeling that settled in my chest wasn't anger, not yet. It was a quiet deflation, a slow leak in my balloon. It was the first of 1,000 moments that taught me a core lesson. Your light is too bright, too inconvenient. Dim it down. Don't take up so much space. This is the classic experience of the invisible or lost child. You learn to suppress your needs, to avoid being a burden. You become overly compliant, emotionally withdrawn, and you internalize the belief that your feelings just aren't important. I became an expert at reading the emotional temperature of a room and adjusting myself accordingly. My role was to be the steady, untroubled backdrop against which the more important family drama could unfold. This pattern has a name: childhood emotional neglect. It's not about the presence of abuse, but the absence of emotional validation and support. That absence is a quiet trauma, leaving wounds that are often unseen but profoundly deep, creating a fundamental insecurity in your own worth. You start to believe the message you're receiving. You don't really matter. And the hit your self-esteem takes? It's devastating. Children who feel unfavored report higher rates of depression and loneliness. In fact, one study showed that up to 40% of people who perceived this favoritism felt lonely growing up. I was definitely one of them. I remember family holidays, feeling like I had a backstage pass to someone else's party. All the conversations, all the energy, all the attention would orbit my brother. His grades, his friends, his latest hobby. I'd sit there, a polite smile plastered on my face, feeling like I was watching a movie about a family I desperately wanted to belong to. The sibling relationship itself becomes a casualty. That natural bond is often poisoned by jealousy and resentment. It's no surprise that studies have found that perceived favoritism reduces closeness among siblings in adulthood. My brother and I weren't rivals in an obvious way. He was largely oblivious, wrapped in the warm blanket of parental adoration. I, on the other hand, carried a secret, simmering resentment that I was deeply ashamed of. How can you resent someone for being loved? It felt monstrous. So, I turned that feeling inward. It became self-blame. It must be me. I must be unlovable. I must not be interesting enough, or smart enough, or special enough. This internal narrative is a survival mechanism. It's easier for a child's brain to believe I am flawed than to accept the terrifying reality that the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally don't, or at least don't seem to. This self-blame becomes the foundation of your identity, leading to crippling self-doubt, anxiety, and a constant need for external validation in adulthood. You develop what's often called imposter syndrome, feeling like a fraud in your own life, perpetually waiting to be found out. The lasagna incident wasn't the first time my achievements were minimized, nor was it the worst. But it was the one that landed differently. For 2 decades, I'd been running a race, convinced that if I just ran faster, worked harder, and achieved more, I would finally cross a finish line where my parents' full, undivided approval was waiting. But as I stood there, phone in my hand, listening to the rapturous description of melted cheese, I realized there was no finish line. The goalposts were always moving because the game was rigged from the start. And in that quiet, devastating moment of clarity, I did the only thing I could do. I quit the race. The weeks after the lasagna call were strange. It was like living in the quiet aftermath of a storm I hadn't even realized was raging inside me. The usual frantic energy I had, that constant, low-grade hum of striving, was gone. In its place was a profound, echoing silence. At first, it was terrifying. That striving, that desperate need for their approval, had been my life's organizing principle. Without it, who even was I? I stopped calling with every little piece of news. I stopped trying to engineer situations where my accomplishments would be noticed. I pulled back, not out of anger, but out of a deep, soul-level exhaustion. And in that space I created, something new began to bubble up: grief. I was grieving the family I wished I had, the parents who could see and celebrate all their children equally, the childhood where I felt unconditionally loved and seen. The real turning point came about a month later. It was my birthday. In years past, I would have orchestrated my own celebration, gently reminding my parents of the date, suggesting a restaurant, making it easy for them to celebrate me. This year, I did nothing. I just let the day arrive, a silent little experiment. The morning passed with a perfunctory, happy birthday text from a family group chat. The afternoon was silent. As evening fell, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Hi, honey," she said, her voice cheerful. "Just calling to see what you're up to. Your brother's soccer team won their match tonight. It was such an exciting game. He played so well." I waited. I held my breath, waiting for her to remember, to say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, it's your birthday." But she didn't. The silence stretched, and in her silence, I found my voice. "It's my birthday, Mom." The words were quiet, flat, and held no accusation. It was just a statement of fact. There was a pause, and then a flustered, "Oh, of course. Oh, I'm so sorry. It completely slipped my mind with all the excitement from the game. We'll celebrate you soon, okay?" I hung up the phone. I didn't cry. I just felt this strange, cold calm. It was the final piece of evidence I didn't even know I was collecting. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't that they didn't love me, not in their own way. It was that my place in the family solar's system was fixed. I was a distant planet, and they were content with me staying in my remote orbit. They weren't going to change. The only thing that could change was me. That night, I sat down with a journal, a practice I'd come to rely on, and wrote a sentence that would become my declaration of independence. My family chose my sibling over me, so today, I choose myself. Choosing myself didn't mean cutting them off. It didn't mean becoming bitter or resentful. It meant I was officially resigning from my lifelong job as applicant for the position of valued child. It meant I was taking the power of my self-worth out of their hands and placing it firmly back into my own. It was the understanding that their validation was a bonus, not a requirement. My validation had to come from within. That was the moment my healing truly began. It was the first day of my life where I was living for an audience of one. Me. Choosing myself wasn't a single event. It was the start of a long, often difficult, but ultimately liberating journey. It was a process of untangling 2 decades of deeply ingrained beliefs. Healing from being the invisible child is like learning to breathe after holding your breath for a lifetime. It's awkward, even painful at first, but eventually, it becomes your new, life-sustaining normal. I found my journey broke down into 3 crucial stages: grieving what I lost, learning to set boundaries, and intentionally rebuilding my self-worth from the ground up. The first and most surprising part of healing was the tidal wave of grief. For years, I'd suppressed my sadness and anger because to feel them would have been to admit that something was wrong. And in my family, nothing was ever wrong. My role was to be the easy one, the one who was always fine. Admitting I wasn't fine felt like a betrayal of my one and only job. Healing required me to finally give myself permission to feel everything. I had to grieve the childhood I deserved, but didn't get. I had to grieve the lack of a close, supportive relationship with my parents and my sibling. It's a strange kind of grief because you're mourning something you never actually had. You're mourning a ghost. You're mourning the mother who would have put down the phone to celebrate with you. You're mourning the father who would have seen your small triumphs as monumental. You're mourning the sibling who could have been your closest ally instead of an unwitting competitor. This grief is messy. It's not a straight line. Some days, I'd be filled with a profound sadness, crying for the 10-year-old girl whose big news was brushed aside. Other days, I'd feel a white-hot anger that my emotional needs were consistently ignored. Anger that I was made to feel small. A huge part of this stage was learning not to judge these feelings. The anger and sadness weren't a sign I was broken. They were a sign I was finally acknowledging the wound. Allowing yourself to feel is the first step to healing. It's like cleaning out an infected wound. It's painful and gross, but it's the only way to stop the infection from spreading deeper. I wrote letters I never sent. I filled journals with all the unspoken hurts. I talked to a therapist who simply sat with me and validated my experience, saying the words I'd needed to hear my whole life. That was not fair. Your feelings are valid. It was not your fault. That validation was like rain on parched earth. It gave me permission to believe my own reality, a critical step, because the invisible child is conditioned to believe their perception is wrong. Reclaiming your narrative starts with accepting your emotional truth. Once I started to process the grief, I realized I couldn't heal in the same environment that made me sick. I needed to change the rules of engagement. I needed to build boundaries. For the invisible child, setting boundaries feels like a full-blown act of rebellion. You're programmed not to have needs, not to cause friction. A boundary is a declaration that you do have needs, and you're willing to protect them. My boundaries weren't loud, aggressive pronouncements. They were quiet, firm shifts in my behavior. First was the boundary of emotional labor. I stopped being the family's emotional manager. I stopped reminding them of birthdays. I stopped smoothing over arguments. I let the natural consequences of their own forgetfulness play out. This was terrifying. My inner people pleaser screamed that if I didn't hold it all together, it would all fall apart, and sometimes it did. But I learned that their relationships with each other were not my responsibility. Second, I created a boundary of conversation. When my mother would launch into a monologue about my brother, I learned to gently redirect. I'd say things like, "That's great for him. I was actually hoping to tell you about my week." Or simply, "I don't really have the energy for this conversation right now." The first few times, it was met with confusion. But a boundary is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. I was teaching them, through my actions, that I would no longer participate in the dynamic that caused me pain. Third, and most importantly, was the boundary of access. I adjusted the amount of time and energy I gave them. I stopped answering every call. I started saying no to last-minute requests that were inconvenient for me. I started prioritizing my own plans, my own peace. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about protecting myself. I realized my mental health was more important than maintaining the illusion of a perfectly harmonious family. Setting boundaries isn't about controlling other people. It's about controlling your own response. You can't force your family to change. But you can decide what you are and are not willing to tolerate. It's about saying, "My well-being matters," and then acting like it does. This is the heart of the journey. For your entire life, your sense of worth has been tied to an external source that was, at best, unreliable. The final stage is about building a new foundation for your self-esteem, one that is unshakable because it is built by you, for you. This process is often called reparenting your inner child. It means giving yourself all the things you didn't get as a kid. For me, this took a lot of practical forms. I started to celebrate my own wins. When I achieved something, I didn't wait for a phone call that might not come. I bought myself a bottle of champagne. I took myself out to a nice dinner. I became my own cheerleader, teaching myself that my accomplishments were valid and worthy of celebration, regardless of anyone else's acknowledgement. I learned to practice self-compassion. The inner critic of an invisible child is relentless. Mine would tell me I was selfish for setting boundaries, that I was overreacting, that I was ungrateful. I had to learn to talk back to that voice. I started treating myself with the same kindness I would offer a friend. When I made a mistake, instead of beating myself up, I'd say, "It's okay. You're human. You're learning." I actively sought out our new mirrors. This is a powerful concept. If your primary mirrors, your parents, reflected a diminished or distorted version of you, you need to find new ones. I invested time in friendships with people who saw me, who valued my opinion, and who celebrated my successes without reservation. I joined a hiking group and a book club, surrounding myself with people who liked me for who I was, not for the role I played. These healthy relationships proved that the old narrative that I was invisible and unimportant was false. Finally, I began to cultivate a life that was authentically mine. For so long, my choices had been subconsciously filtered through the lens of what will make them proud of me. I started asking a different question: what will make me happy? I started taking pottery classes, even though I was terrible at it, just because I loved the feeling of the clay in my hands. I planned trips to places I wanted to see. I was building a life filled with my own joy, my own interests, my own values. I was no longer a supporting character in my family's story. I was the protagonist of my own. This 3-part journey, grieving, setting boundaries, and rebuilding self-worth, isn't a checklist you complete once. It's a spiral. You'll circle back through these stages again and again. But each time, you'll be stronger, more grounded, and more certain of your own intrinsic value. So, what does life look like now on the other side? It's not a fairy tale ending where my family had a sudden epiphany and everything is perfect. In many ways, the dynamic is the same. My brother is still the sun their world orbits, but what has fundamentally, seismically changed is me. The desperate ache for their approval is gone. In its place is a quiet, solid sense of self. I can now be in their presence without feeling like I'm auditioning. I can listen to stories about my brother's successes. And while a faint echo of the old sting might occasionally surface, it no longer defines my worth. I can even feel genuinely happy for him because his success is no longer a measure of my failure. The competition is over. My relationship with them is different now. It's more honest, if a bit more distant. We have conversations, but they are on my terms. I share what I'm comfortable sharing. I engage when I have the emotional energy, and I politely disengage when I don't. The fear that used to dictate my every interaction, the fear of their disapproval or disappointment, has lost its power. I took away its food source, my own need. There's a surprising benefit to this journey. The non-favored child, having had to forge their own path, can develop incredible resilience and independence. Having to build your own validation system from scratch is hard work, but the resulting structure is strong. It's self-sufficient. You learn that you can survive and even thrive without the applause. My life is now filled with a richness that comes from my own choices. My friendships are deeper, my joy is more authentic, and my peace is non-negotiable. I no longer feel like a ghost. I feel solid. I take up space in the world, not because anyone gave me permission, but because I realized the space was mine to take all along. Choosing myself was the hardest and most important decision of my life. It was the act of looking at my own reflection and finally saying, "You are enough. You have always been enough." The journey from being the invisible child to a self-defined adult is a profound reclamation of self. It's about understanding that the love and validation you were so desperately seeking from others was inside you all along. Your worth was never in their hands to give. It is, and always has been, your birthright. The scars of parental favoritism run deep, affecting our mental health and our relationships. But they do not have to be a life sentence. Healing is possible. It starts with the radical act of seeing yourself, validating your own experiences, and taking back the pen to write your own story. It's a path of grieving what was lost, building fences to protect your peace, and pouring your energy back into the most important project you will ever have. You. This path isn't always easy. It can feel lonely, but you are not alone in this. There's a whole community of people who are learning to choose themselves every single day. If this story resonates with you, if you're on this journey, or you're ready to start it, I want you to go down to the comments right now and declare it. Type, "I choose myself." Let this be a space where we see each other, where we validate each other, and where we walk this path together. Your voice, your story, and your healing matter. And if you want to explore more about this, please subscribe for more content. Thank you for holding space for this story. Be kind to yourself today.